So switching gears here a little bit, instead of working on the engine over there as I've been doing for a little bit here, I'm trying to finish up a computer build for my uncle. I've got most of the actual parts inside the house, but essentially I'm making an NES a PC inside of an NES entertainment system, the case. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually going to make the original NES controller plugs still usable, so you can plug in a regular NES controller and it will act as a USB device on the PC, so that way we can play games using the original controllers, because my uncle's a fan of the old, not the power pad, whatever it was, the large joystick one, which he's got. So essentially I snipped off the old cables here, so the old connector fittings that were on the original controllers, spliced on. I had some just regular old breadboard wires, development wires with pins and connectors and whatnot. So I'm getting this all set up. I've got this one done. I went ahead and soldered on a new splice of wire, and on the ends I have my female connectors for all the pinouts I got over there. The next one I'll probably cut to length, so it's not going to be awkward lengths here. But anyway, so once I get these wired in, I'm doing this just so I can unplug these at some point in case I ever need to pull them out of the case. It's not all soldered onto a board. But I've got this little chip here, which I bought on the interwebs, which will essentially allow me to connect up to 4 controllers. I don't need 4 controllers because the original NES only had 2. But I'm going to solder them in here, and essentially it's controllers in on one side with some of these little ports, and then on the other side it's a USB out. So the 4 on the left there, I'll solder on to regular, it's pretty much the same pinouts as these that attach onto the motherboard, power headers, so I can plug in a USB internally on the computer. So I'll get that wired on, and then these will go right back into the original case. I'll kind of get into that a little bit later. I'm skipping ahead. I haven't started a video on the beginning of this build, but I'll get these put back into the case, and then we'll test it out a little bit later. I've got most of the parts coming. Had to rebuild this thing because it had gone so long without having it finished. So I've got new motherboard, new processor, APU actually. It's a GPU and CPU inside the same thing. So I'll get that. New RAM. I'll kind of go over the specs and all that cool stuff when it all comes and I piece it all together, and I'll show you the rest. But for now I'm just doing the controllers and soldering onto that little chip, and then we'll test that out on the motherboard and make sure it all works. I'll keep you posted. Alright, it's a quick update on this guy. So I've got the chip all soldered on. So on the end here I've got your standard USB cables, color coded to what it should match, so it'll be a little easier to rig up when I get it on the computer. Very, very fine soldering pads on these, so I'm hoping I'm not touching on any of these. I can't even zoom in that close, but looks like there's a teeny gap, so hopefully nothing's crossing over. We'll have to test this whole thing out. But then I've got some extenders soldered onto this with wired pins, and then on the other one here, the other controller, I've got the female connectors. So I got one hooked up just to show you kind of how it looks. So this guy will plug into the front of the case, right where it used to go. Just did a little cable management, and then I can disconnect these at will. So I'll connect them both up, and then I'll probably just plug it in and just make sure I did the soldering okay, see if they actually work. I haven't even tested this chip. I got it some years ago to do this project, but never got around to it. So we will test that out, make sure the solders are okay, and if both controllers work, or I guess both ports work, I'll probably have to use one controller for both. I don't think I have 2 NES controllers to test with. But if that's good to go, then we'll just find a place in the case, or maybe I'll just keep it loose. I don't even know if this needs to really, I should probably fix it down. Maybe I'll dab a hot glue or something, but we'll find a place for it in the case, and then when the parts come, we'll permanently fix it all. So that's my progress so far. There, it's done. What do you think? I'm just kidding. So I've got this thing torn apart. Everything is just sitting in here, and I'm actually replacing basically the whole computer. This is my first video on my NES PC that I never completed and got working. So I'm circling back. I got to get this thing done by like the weekend, so it doesn't really leave me a whole lot of time. But I've got my good old pile of goodie bag parts over here, and I'll kind of get into some of that a little bit later here. But I just wanted to show, before I tear this all down, how I had it rigged up just so you can see what I attempted originally. You know, I just threw some cardboard and some tape. Really, I don't want to say half-assed it, but you know, I just something. I had a little padding on the two drives. One's a SATA drive, or sorry, both SATA drives. One's a solid-state drive. One is in a laptop regular disk. So these are getting replaced. Whole thing's getting replaced because I couldn't quite track down what the problem was. This will work as is, turns on, but I got some weird graphics glitching kind of going on, and I can't really track it down without trying to replace some of these components. Tried, you know, doing diagnostics, and RAM I think is good. I think it's between, you know, power supply's brand new, so I know that's not it. It's between the motherboard and the CPU/GPU, because it's a GPU or APU chip inside the thing. I don't remember the specs on it right now, but I believe it is a dual core, I want to say 2.7-ish, something like that, and I don't remember how many GPU cores, but long story short is this whole thing's getting redone. But I was going to show you before I tear it apart kind of how I did it. So I've got the buttons in the front working. So that is actually a new feature. I got the original power and select buttons in the front. Obviously I had to do some jimmy rigging on the inside. I'll show you that switch when I pull everything out. But this was kind of the design I came up with. A lot of these builds, and this is certainly not the first, there's actually quite a few of these builds I've seen, and they all kind of have their own quirks and workarounds and weird things they do. I decided to go the route of using an APU processor, so I don't have to have a dedicated graphics card. One, they're hard to come by right now, but two, fitting it in the case, I've only seen one person pull it off, and it was really packed. So I didn't want to do that. Also, you notice I have a regular power supply, a regular sized, well, it's a mini ITX PSU in this thing. 500 watts, just bought it. And the reason I went with that is because I can't stand bricks. I wanted this whole thing to be one complete unit without having to have a giant brick. And even the bricks I couldn't find with the right, you know, enough wattage to run what I'm going to put in this thing. So, spinning it around, you can kind of see the back. So obviously I dremeled out enough of the case so that the cover plate for the motherboard would fit. It's just kind of sitting in there right now, but it's pretty snug. Fits pretty good. Had the same pitfalls as kind of everybody in these builds. As soon as I took out the bottom of this thing, and maybe I can show it, or I'll just show you later here. Once you cut out those center pieces, the parts that stand up inside of the case, it becomes a nightmare as far as being sturdy. It basically takes all the structural integrity out of this thing. So as you can kind of see, I just have a metal plate in there. And, you know, why not just use some screws, some nuts and bolts? I mean, that's the simplest way of getting stuff done. So that's what I went with. Obviously, I'm going to build, actually I'm going to make some feet. I think I'm just going to get some longer, you know, nuts and bolts and whatever, and maybe I can get some of those little standoffs that are just, you know, capped on one end or whatever. I'll just use those as 4 little legs that go a little bit further down than the rest of the nuts and bolts. So one, it will add a little airflow underneath the thing, which can never hurt in this scenario where everything is really packed, but also just to kind of keep it from standing on those nuts and bolts, because right now it's not even, you know, some of them are longer than the others, so I'll fix that part. So I think what I'm going to do is start tearing this guy down. I'll take out the power supply, unhook everything, get the cables out of the way, and then maybe you'll see it a little bit better, and then I can start unscrewing the motherboard itself, and I'll pull that out, and then I'll show the inside of the case, kind of what I came up with here. Alright, so I got her opened up a little bit, got that power supply out of there, so there's a lot more room to kind of show things. So again, I've got the original power reset buttons and the original little you know, plastic piece for the LED. So on the back, really all I did was kind of jimmy rig a few things to get this thing to work. So flip around and show the back a little better. So what I ended up doing was this, the original switch had a giant chipboard attached to it. It's just completely unnecessary for that much junk. So what I did was desolder all the components off the bottom of this guy, get that chip off of there, and it had this little mounting rail, little metal bracket here. You can see that a little bit better. May not zoom very good, but that little mounting bracket actually worked pretty slick. So what I ended up doing is this plastic deal for the LED, just had the LED pushed inside. So I just snagged another LED off of you know, a computer, just because it had the right header mounts on it. Could have reused the original LED and, you know, soldered some stuff on, but that was simple enough. And then what I did for the switches, obviously modern computers really don't have reset switches. I mean, some of them do, but you don't use that, right? So you shouldn't be hard rebooting your computer. So the reset and the power switches, I ended up cutting off the back side of the switches. Had a huge, blue tail on this thing that actually contained the switch component. So I kept the front end with the little springs and the blue thing, the guides, basically. Did that. So on this one, I'm swinging over the side a little bit, I took and mounted into the rail just a regular PC switch that I sniped out of another computer just to get the little switching component. And then I rigged it up so when you push in the button, the little red things on the side push that switch. So the original switch doesn't control the switching, but it does push against an actual switch that's just mounted into this little steel mounting bracket. So that way you get your nice tactile button pushing, get the nice clicky sound, and the springs. So then on the front it looks legit. Inside, taking up probably half the space, if not more. Just taking off that circuit board was ridiculous. So that rail, I had to do that, taking off the original component, original circuit boards, because the power supply that sits in here obviously takes up a big chunk of the space, and with the wires coming out of the front of the power supply, there just wasn't enough room to maneuver. Maybe with this new power supply, I could have gotten it. It has a thinner gauge wire, but I wasn't going to dink with it, so I just ended up doing that. So that's what I got for the switches. There's a little bit of residue here. I used some epoxy to glue down the original power supply, and that ended up blowing on me. I totally amateur moved that one and did something stupid and ruined it, so I had to buy a new one. So I upped the wattage, because why not? Same form factor, still fits the same exact size. So that's what I ended up doing. I'll pull this guy out here in a sec and show you what I've got for the steel plate. You can kind of see just offhandedly the steel plate's just kind of sitting in the bottom with some screws, or nuts and bolts on the bottom here. And then I think, let me see, I do have the front of this guy that's going to get mounted. And this one is mostly unadulterated, except for cutting out a little bit there on the bottom just to account for that motherboard plate, which I'm hoping is the same size. If it's not, I'm gonna have to do some more cutting. And we'll see if this is the same size. So this was basically where the plug-in had a little raised bezel for the power plug-in, so on the power supply. So I haven't really checked if it lines up, but I'll do all the measuring and checking. So let me pull this motherboard out and show you a little bit more. Alright, so that's what I got on the inside. So I've got the motherboard taken out and all the components, and just left the switch kind of hanging off the side, but this is what I ended up doing. So I've got the steel plate kind of just nutted and bolted down. I've got two over here that went through to the bottom of the case to mount the motherboard. I had a third to mount the motherboard over here. And actually over here I didn't have one that went through. I had my original idea, which totally bombed. I gave up on it. These were the original little screw kind of standoffs that were inside of the case. So I took a screw and used the original standoffs, and then I super glued them down, and that was just no bueno. Super glue just didn't do nothing. So no more super glue, not using it for anything, nuts and bolts the whole way. But yeah, underneath this thing just was basically to give a little structure to the whole thing. As you can kind of see, once the back is chewed out, and there's not much left of the back, and there's not much left of the bottom, structurally it's just not much there. So that helps. So I got those, three of them in there. That's fine. That's going to hold the thing together, even if it doesn't hold that last corner. But I'll probably end up having to put another one in there, because I think I should have at least four screws for these motherboards. So I think next I'm going to pull up my brand new motherboard. We'll take a little gander at it, and then I think we'll try and mount it. We'll have to see what should have the same bolt patterns, should be the same size, but we'll see. Worst case, I've got lots of nuts and bolts and washers, which is what I ended up doing. I used a pair of nuts just to screw into the bolt, and use that as the standoff. So just something to keep it off of that the metal backing, but also ground it. So I will keep going.